All right, let's take a look at bonding, and we're going to focus on naming ionic compounds and writing formulas for ionic compounds. You know you got it if you can identify the correct charge of an ion, you can balance charges, and you can remember some rules for polyatomic ions and transition metals. So, how do you name ionic compounds? It's actually really easy. Ionic compounds are named with the cation name first and then the anion name. Remember that the cation is the positive and the anion is the negative, and we'll never use prefixes for ionic compounds. So the cations are typically going to be metals, and if the metals are in group 1, 2, and 13, then the ion name is just the element name. So Na plus is a sodium ion. Ca plus 2 is a calcium ion. Both of those are in these groups. Transition metals have a special rule. Transition metals, we don't know the charge just by looking at the periodic table. So we're going to put a Roman numeral next to the symbol in parentheses to indicate the charge. So if I'm looking at an Fe plus 3 ion, then I'm going to call this iron and in parentheses 3. If I'm looking at a copper plus ion, I'll have copper with a parentheses 1. And these will be given in one way or the other. You'll either be given the name or you'll have to figure out this charge. Now, nonmetals are also fairly simple, but nonmetals are on the periodic table are just going to end in IDE. So oxygen becomes oxide, fluorine becomes fluoride. Now, if I see more than one nonmetal, this is what we call a polyatomic ion. And these have their own special names. So if you ever see more than one nonmetal, stop and look at a list of polyatomic ions and find its name. And you'll get this list on exams, you'll get this list on homeworks. This is a reference material. So more than one nonmetal, stop and check for a polyatomic ion name. They typically also end in ate or ite. So if you hear that ate or ite ending, it's a good thing to come check. All right, let's practice naming ionic compounds. So here's LiCl. First thing I need to do is find out if these are on my periodic table. Li is lithium. It's the metal, so it's just going to be called lithium. Cl is chlorine, but we're going to change the ending to IDE. So we have lithium chloride. Here's another one. Al is aluminum. I'm just going to call it what it is. O is oxygen. We're going to change the ending to ide, aluminum oxide. No prefixes. Here is Ca. It's on the periodic table. It's just going to be calcium. Now I see more than one nonmetal. So I'm going to check my polyatomic list. SO4, it has a -2 charge, is sulfate. So we're just going to call this calcium sulfate. And finally, let's try one with a transition metal. So here I have Fe, and I need to figure out what its charge is. This is iron 2, and I know because it's connected to 2 nitrates. And if I go and find nitrate, it's on my polyatomic ion list. It has a -1 charge. There's 2 of them, so we're going to know that this iron is iron 2 nitrate. We'll go into that more specifically later on, especially when we review. But that's it for naming ionic compounds. We just use the element names, or we're using these polyatomic ions, and then we are changing the endings to nonmetals to IDE, and you'll notice that I never used a prefix. So I can always tell when I'm looking at ionic compounds because they won't have prefixes.